Amidst the unforgiving concrete canyons of a sprawling metropolis, 8-year-old Elara, a homeless orphan hardened by survival, discovers a shocking secret tucked away in a grimy alley. Blue, a silent, fair-skinned toddler, alone and lost. Clutching a single faded photograph of his beaming parents, their only clue, Elara makes a solemn vow to reunite the boy with his family. What begins as a desperate search for lost parents quickly accelerates into a fast-paced adventure across the city's stark divide, plunging the unlikely duo into a high-stakes world of corporate espionage and danger that is far more perilous than the poverty they know. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The biting wind of late autumn whipped through the narrow alley, carrying with it the scent of stale garbage and the distant hum of city life. Elara, a wisp of an 8-year-old, huddled deeper into the tattered blanket she'd salvaged from a dumpster behind a bakery. Her stomach growled a familiar, persistent protest, but she'd long since learned to ignore its demands. Survival, for Elara, was a daily art form, a delicate dance between vigilance and resourcefulness. Her makeshift home was a cardboard box, tucked away behind overflowing bins, offering a meager shield against the elements and the prying eyes of a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Orphaned as long as she could remember, the streets had been her cruel, unforgiving mother, teaching her lessons in resilience and self-reliance no school could ever impart. Her small frame belied a fierce spirit, and her eyes, though often shadowed with a weariness beyond her years, held a spark of unyielding determination. Today, however, an unusual silence hung in the alley. The usual scuffle of rats and the occasional shout from a nearby apartment building were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that prickled at Elara's instincts. She'd learned to trust those instincts. They'd saved her more times than she could count. Slowly, cautiously, she peered out from her cardboard sanctuary, her gaze sweeping across the familiar grimy landscape. That's when she saw it. A splash of bright color against the drab backdrop of brick and graffiti. A small, vibrant blue jacket, seemingly abandoned near a discarded wooden pallet. Curiosity, a dangerous but often rewarding trait, tugged at her. With a practiced stealth, she crept towards the unusual sight, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete. As she drew closer, a chilling realization washed over her. The jacket wasn't abandoned, it was on a child. A tiny boy, no older than 3 or 4, lay curled in a fetal position, his fair skin almost luminous in the dim light of the alley. His golden hair was tousled, a stark contrast to the dirt smudged on his cheeks. He was shivering violently, his small body trembling with a vulnerability that pierced through Elara's hardened shell. Fear, a cold dread she hadn't felt in a long time, seized her. This wasn't a street kid, hardened by necessity like herself. This was a child, innocent and utterly out of place. He looked like he'd been plucked from a warm bed and dropped into this desolate concrete canyon. His small lips were tinged blue and his breathing was shallow. Elara's heart, a muscle she usually kept tightly guarded, ached with a sudden, overwhelming empathy. She knew what it felt like to be alone and afraid, but this boy, he was truly lost. Without a second thought, Elara shed her own tattered blanket and carefully draped it over the boy, hoping its meager warmth would offer some comfort. She knelt beside him, her small hand gently touching his forehead. He was cold, too cold. A frantic energy surged through her. What should she do? Her mind raced, sifting through the limited options available to a homeless orphan. Taking him to the police station was a fleeting thought, immediately dismissed. The police, in her experience, were not a source of comfort or help for children like her, or even for children found in alleys. They asked questions she couldn't answer, separated families, or what was left of them, and often sent kids to places that felt more like prisons than homes. No, she couldn't risk that. He needed his family, not a system that might swallow him whole. As she deliberated, the boy stirred, a soft whimper escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open, wide and blue, filled with a confusion that mirrored her own. He looked at her, then around the grimy alley, a silent question in his gaze. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just stared, a silent tableau of bewilderment. Elara offered a small, reassuring smile, her own fear momentarily pushed aside by the need to comfort him. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, her voice surprisingly soft. "You're safe now." He didn't respond, just continued to stare, his small hand instinctively reaching for the edge of the blanket she'd given him. It was then, as she tried to think of a way to help him, that her eyes caught a glimpse of something protruding from the pocket of his tiny blue jacket. A small, crumpled piece of paper. With a hesitant hand, Elara reached into the pocket and pulled it out. It was a photograph, faded and slightly creased, but undeniably clear. It showed a beaming couple, a man and a woman, their arms wrapped around a younger version of the boy now huddled before her. Their smiles were wide, full of a warmth and love that seemed to radiate from the picture, even in the dim light of the alley. This was it. The clue. The only link he had to his past, to his family. A surge of fierce protectiveness washed over Elara. This photo wasn't just a piece of paper, it was hope. "Your mom and dad," she murmured, showing him the picture. He looked at it, then at her, a flicker of recognition in his blue eyes. He didn't say anything, but a tiny, almost imperceptible nod confirmed her suspicion. This was his family. And he was lost without them. A new resolve settled deep within Elara. She wouldn't abandon him. She couldn't. She knew the crushing weight of being alone, the gnawing emptiness of not belonging. She wouldn't let this little boy experience that any longer than he already had. The photo became her compass, her mission. They would find his family. Together. The immediate challenge, however, was his health. He was still shivering, his body weak. He needed food, warmth, and a safe place to rest. Her cardboard box, while offering minimal shelter, was hardly a suitable recovery ward. Elara glanced around the alley, her eyes scanning for any potential threats, any signs of others who might interfere with her newfound purpose. The alley remained quiet, but the city beyond its confines was waking up, its sounds growing louder. They couldn't stay here. She needed to move him, and quickly. "Can you walk, little guy?" she asked, her voice gentle. He tried to push himself up, but his small legs buckled, and he collapsed back onto the blanket with a soft groan. He was too weak. Elara sighed, a small puff of white mist escaping her lips in the cold air. She was small, but she was stronger than she looked. She'd hauled heavier things than this boy. With determination etched on her face, she carefully helped him sit up, then with a grunt, maneuvered him onto her back. His small arms instinctively wrapped around her neck, surprisingly tight for his weakened state. He was light, almost feather-light, a testament to how small he truly was. Slowly, carefully, Elara began to walk, carrying her precious cargo. She moved with a practiced stealth, weaving through the alleyways, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the main streets where curious eyes might linger too long. Her destination was uncertain, but her purpose was clear. They needed a safer place, a temporary sanctuary where he could regain his strength. Her mind churned, sifting through the mental map she had of the city's forgotten corners, abandoned buildings, secluded park benches, hidden alcoves. The city, vast and indifferent, was also full of unseen nooks and crannies, places where those like her could disappear, if only for a little while. As she walked, the sun began its slow ascent, casting long, pale shadows down the alley. The cold air, however, showed no signs of relenting. Elara pulled her thin, oversized jacket tighter around herself, trying to share what little warmth she had with the boy on her back. He remained silent, his head resting against her shoulder, his breathing still shallow but more even now. The weight of him, both physically and emotionally, settled upon her, but it wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility she embraced with a fierce, quiet strength. Her thoughts returned to the photograph, tucked securely in her own pocket now, a tangible link to their quest. His parents looked happy, vibrant. They must be searching for him, frantic with worry. The thought fueled her determination. She imagined their relief, their joy, when they finally held their son again. It was a powerful image, a beacon in the bleak landscape of her own life. She had never known that kind of familial love, that kind of belonging. But she could help this boy find it. And in doing so, perhaps she could find a sliver of it for herself. The first rays of sunlight finally touched the top of the tallest buildings, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The city was stirring, its morning cacophony slowly building. Elara knew they couldn't stay hidden in the alleys much longer. They needed to blend in, to become invisible. Her journey had just begun, a perilous adventure with a lost boy and a faded photograph as their only guides. She didn't know where it would lead or what dangers they would face. But one thing was certain, she wouldn't give up. Not on him and not on the chance to reunite a family. The alley's secret had become her solemn vow. The sun, now fully risen, was a cold, indifferent eye watching Elara as she navigated the labyrinthine streets of the city's underbelly. The weight of the boy, whom she'd quietly started calling Blue, for his jacket and striking eyes, was a constant, tiring presence, yet also a strange source of strength. She had decided on the old abandoned train yard, a sprawling graveyard of rusting steel and forgotten tracks on the city's industrial fringe. It was far, but it offered two crucial things: absolute anonymity and a relatively dry, sheltered spot within the carcass of a derelict passenger car she'd used before. The challenge was getting there without attracting attention, a task made exponentially harder with a shivering toddler clinging to her back. Elara moved with the practiced rhythm of a ghost, hugging the shadows of loading docks and the blind spots of security cameras. She wrapped her tattered blanket, now serving as a makeshift sling, tighter around Blue. His stillness was unnerving. He hadn't spoken a single word, not even a syllable, since she found him. He just clung to her, a small, quiet presence whose occasional shivers were the only indication he was awake. The silence worried her more than any crying might have. It hinted at a shock deeper than just the cold. She tried talking to him, offering quiet, nonsensical promises of warmth and food, her voice a low, soothing drone, but he offered no response. The faded photograph, tucked securely inside her only inner pocket, felt like a burning coal, reminding her of the urgency of their mission. This silence, this profound lostness, had to be temporary. They needed to find the people in the picture, the ones who could make him speak again. Her immediate focus, however, was sustenance. Blue needed to eat, and she needed energy for the long haul. She diverted her route, a slight detour that led her to the rear entrance of a modest Italian bakery. It was a risky move, but one based on past success. She knew the baker, an old, weary man named Mr. Giovanni, sometimes left the day-old bread bin ajar. Today, luck, in its rare, fleeting form, was on her side. The lid was slightly ajar. With a quick glance up and down the alley, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she slid her hand into the bin. Her fingers closed around two slightly stale but blessedly intact ciabatta rolls. It wasn't much, but it was calories. It was survival. She retreated to a narrow alcove between two tall recycling bins, setting Blue down gently against the relative softness of a pile of flattened cardboard boxes. His legs were still wobbly, and he leaned heavily against the cardboard. Elara broke off a small piece of the roll, wetting it slightly with her own spit before offering it to him. His blue eyes tracked the movement, a hesitant curiosity replacing some of the confusion. Slowly, tentatively, he took the offering. The chewing was slow, painstaking, but he swallowed it. A small victory, but a momentous one. Elara watched, a surge of fierce, maternal satisfaction warming her. She devoured her own share quickly, the dry bread a welcome balm to her aching stomach, then offered him a little more. She had to ration it, of course, but his need was paramount. As they ate, the city around them roared to life. The sounds of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the clatter of commerce. They were all a symphony of danger and opportunity. Elara knew they couldn't linger. She pointed at the photograph now lying in her lap, tapping the faces of the man and the woman. "We're going to find them," she whispered, her voice a promise. "We're going to look for these people, Blue. We'll start with where rich people hang out. They look like rich people, don't they?" Her logic was simple, almost childlike, but she trusted it. People with neat clothes and happy, well-fed faces in photographs belonged to a different world, a world of means. A world where people searched frantically for a lost child. The decision was made. They needed to move out of the industrial zone and towards the city's heart, the affluent districts with their manicured parks and upscale storefronts. It was a dangerous area for a girl and a toddler with no legitimate reason to be there, a zone patrolled by vigilant security guards and nosy citizens. But it was also where the family in the photo most likely resided. It was the only tangible direction she had. The photograph was their compass, and the concrete jungle was their uncharted sea. Elara picked Blue up again, adjusting him on her back with the practiced ease of an experienced traveler. The next leg of their journey was agonizingly slow. She avoided main thoroughfares, opting instead for back alleys, construction sites, and the dense cover of city parks. She walked for hours, her muscles screaming in protest, the meager meal doing little to replenish her expended energy. But every time the fatigue threatened to overwhelm her, she felt the small, precious weight of Blue and pushed on. His quiet trust was an unspoken mandate. They finally reached the fringe of the affluent district near midday. The air here was cleaner, the streets wider, the buildings taller and made of polished stone and glass instead of worn brick. The people looked different too, dressed in expensive coats, their faces preoccupied with phones and briefcases. They were ghosts to these people, invisible unless they did something to warrant attention. Elara kept her head down, trying to blend into the scenery, moving with a purposeful stride that made her seem like she belonged, or at least, like she was on a legitimate errand. She stopped at a small public fountain in a quiet square, a popular spot for wealthy nannies and parents with expensive strollers. This was their first point of contact, their moment of action. She took a deep, steadying breath, then carefully sat Blue on a low stone wall, holding him steady. The cold had eased slightly, and the sunlight warmed his face, bringing a faint, much-needed color back to his cheeks. He finally seemed to be stirring from his stunned stupor. He reached out a small, curious hand and tentatively touched the water of the fountain. Elara pulled out the photograph. It was time to show it around. The thought filled her with a nervous energy that translated into a slight tremor in her hands. This was a direct, visible action, a departure from her usual strategy of invisibility. She was putting herself and Blue out there, opening them up to scrutiny and potential danger. But there was no other way. She started with a woman sitting on a bench, scrolling through a phone while her impeccably dressed child played nearby. Elara approached her with caution, her small voice barely a whisper. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her tone respectful. The woman didn't look up, merely waving a dismissive hand. "Can I help you, kid? I don't have any change." Elara's face burned with a flush of shame, but she pushed the feeling down. She held out the photo. "No, ma'am. I'm looking for these people. They're this little boy's parents. Have you seen them?" The woman finally looked up, her expression one of annoyance quickly morphing into a fleeting flicker of curiosity, then judgment. She glanced from the clean, smiling faces in the photo to Elara's tattered clothing, then to Blue, who was still silently mesmerized by the fountain. She barely glanced at the picture before shaking her head. "No, sorry. Never seen them. Now run along. This is a private area." Her voice was clipped, final. Dejection was a familiar taste, but Elara didn't let it linger. She moved on, approaching a young man in a sharp suit, then a nanny pushing a twin stroller, repeating her question, showing the photograph like a sacred relic. The responses were all variations of the same: dismissal, suspicion, and a hurried turning away. Nobody recognized the couple. The fear that they were searching a vast, impossible needle in a haystack began to creep into her heart. She was about to give up for the moment, to find a place to rest and rethink their strategy, when an old man feeding pigeons near the fountain looked up at her. He was dressed in worn but clean clothes, his face kind, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. Elara approached him with renewed hope. "Sir, excuse me, have you seen these people?" she asked, holding out the photograph. The man took the picture, holding it close to his eyes. He studied it for a long, quiet moment, his thumb tracing the edges. Elara held her breath, her small chest tight with anticipation. He finally looked up, his gaze moving from the photo to Blue, then back to Elara. "Yes," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I believe I have. They live around here. I've seen them walking in the park with this little lad many times. They have a house, a very big one, just a few blocks from here. On Elmwood Street. Near the big church with the copper dome. The house has a red door." Elara's world tilted. A sudden, exhilarating rush of adrenaline chased away all her fatigue. A name, a street, a red door. It was a concrete lead, a real physical location. Her face broke into a wide, genuine smile, a flash of pure, unadulterated hope she hadn't known in years. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much," she stammered, grabbing the photo back and tucking it securely away. The man simply smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Good luck to you, young one." And to the boy. Elara didn't wait. She scooped Blue up, his unexpected discovery seeming to fill her with superhuman strength. Elmwood Street. The big church. The red door. The fatigue was forgotten, the hunger ignored. Their compass of concrete was finally pointing true north. The adventure had just shifted gears, accelerating from a weary trudge into a desperate, hopeful sprint. The thought of knocking on that red door, of seeing the reunion of the boy and his family, was a powerful vision, one that propelled her forward through the crowds, her eyes fixed on the distant promise of a copper dome. They were close. So close. But as she ran, a new, unsettling thought occurred to her. Why, if the family lived so close, had their child been found shivering in a desolate alley so far away? The mystery, she realized, was far from solved. Elara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline and hope as she approached Elmwood Street. Blue, still silent but now wide-eyed, clung to her neck, his small body a warm, trusting weight. The fatigue that had threatened to cripple her only moments before had evaporated, replaced by a fierce, almost manic energy. The affluent neighborhood was a world away from her usual haunts. Houses here weren't just structures, they were statements, imposing, immaculately kept, framed by wrought iron fences and bursts of colorful late-season chrysanthemums. Every corner seemed to hold the promise of the family in the photo. She spotted the copper dome of the church first, its patina glinting softly under the afternoon sun, a solid landmark that confirmed the old man's directions. Just past it, set back from the street behind a manicured hedge, was a house that matched the description. Large, Victorian style with sharp gables and a pristine facade. And there it was, the red door, a deep, polished mahogany that stood out like a beacon of sanctuary. Elara paused across the street, crouched behind a thick lilac bush. The moment of truth was upon them, and with it came a tremor of unexpected fear. What if the old man was mistaken? What if this was the wrong house and the people inside called the police? She pushed the paralyzing doubt aside. They had to try. For Blue. She adjusted her grip on the boy who had started to squirm, pointing a small finger at the house. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice a raw, barely audible sound. The word was a jolt, a profound shock that resonated deep within Elara. It was the first word he'd spoken. The sound was broken, hesitant, but it was a bridge back to his world. A swell of emotion, a mix of triumph and deep sorrow, made her eyes sting. "Yes, Blue. Maybe your mommy is right there," she murmured, holding him tighter. The whisper of the word was the final push she needed. Taking a deep breath, Elara crossed the street, her bare feet surprisingly silent on the pavement. She walked up the stone path, each step heavy with the weight of her responsibility. Reaching the red door, she set Blue gently down. He immediately shuffled forward and began patting the wood with his tiny hands, a soft, repetitive sound. Elara raised a trembling hand and knocked. It wasn't the tentative tap of a beggar, but a firm, urgent rap, fueled by desperation. Silence. She waited, straining her ears, listening for the internal sounds of a frantic house. The click of a lock, the hurried footsteps of worried parents. Nothing. The only sound was the faint hum of distant traffic. She knocked again, louder this time, her desperation mounting. "Hello? Please. Is anyone home?" she called out, her voice cracking with the effort. Still silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that was far more unsettling than any answer would have been. A house this large, in a neighborhood this quiet, should have been full of life, or at the very least, full of the sounds of its occupants. Elara walked to a large bay window and cupped her hands around her eyes, peering inside. The interior was magnificent, with high ceilings, polished wooden floors, and elegant furniture shrouded in white dust covers. The house was empty. Not just temporarily vacant, but completely, eerily shut down. There were no coats on the rack, no dishes in the sink, no toys scattered on the floor, the unmistakable signs of a home where people had either left in a hurry or hadn't been present for a long time. The dust confirmed it. A thin, gray layer lay undisturbed on every surface. A cold dread seeped into Elara's bones, colder than the morning's wind. The high of finding the address crashed into the brutal reality of the empty dwelling. Blue's family wasn't here. Not only were they not here, but it seemed they hadn't been for a considerable time. What did this mean? Had the family moved? Or were they away searching for Blue somewhere else? If they had moved, why would the old man, a local, still identify them with this address? If they were searching, why hadn't they secured the house or asked neighbors to watch for news? Blue, sensing the shift in her mood, whimpered again, his small face screwed up in confusion and disappointment. He looked back at her, his eyes mirroring the bewilderment she felt. "No, Mommy?" he whispered again, the question tearing at her resolve. Elara knelt, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, Blue. They're not here," she whispered, her voice husky. "But we're going to keep looking. This is just a detour, okay? A wrong turn. They couldn't stay. Standing on the porch of an empty mansion even for a moment was drawing too much attention. She hurried them back down the path and across the street, taking refuge behind a row of tall hedges. She pulled out the photo again, staring at the faces. There was a detail she'd missed earlier, obscured by the crease and the fading. Behind the beaming couple, almost out of focus, was a distinctive architectural feature. A stylized stone lion perched on a low garden wall. It was a common feature perhaps, but coupled with the house, it felt like another, albeit vague, clue. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the old man's confident identification with the house's vacancy. She needed to go back to the source. She needed more information. They had to find the old man, Mr. Giovanni the baker, or someone, anyone, who could shed light on the family's disappearance from this address. With a heavy sigh, she began walking, moving away from Elmwood Street, back towards the city's commercial heart. The afternoon was waning, and the cold was returning with the setting sun. The promise of the red door had led them to a dead end, and now the immediate priority shifted back to survival, food and shelter for the night. The thought of sleeping on the street with Blue, in this freezing weather, filled her with a new, sharp urgency. They ended up near a small, quiet urban park, a place where Elara felt marginally safer. She found a secluded, dry alcove beneath a thick-crowned oak tree, surrounded by dense bushes. It would offer a small buffer against the wind and the cold, but it was far from ideal. She used her tattered blanket to create a small nest, settling Blue in first, rubbing his small hands for warmth. As the last sliver of the sun disappeared, casting the city in long purple shadows, Elara felt a deep well of exhaustion. The failure at the red door had been a huge emotional and physical drain. They had wasted precious time and energy, and now they were back to square one with a deeper, more troubling mystery. Why was the boy's family absent from the house he recognized as home? Before trying to sleep, she pulled out the ciabatta rolls. She gave Blue the larger piece, watching as he slowly, methodically chewed. This silent act of caring was the only thing that kept the despair at bay. As she ate her own meager portion, she looked up at the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant, mirroring the vast, uncaring city that surrounded them. She knew she couldn't risk another day of random searching. Their fast-paced adventure had hit a sudden, jarring stop sign. Tomorrow they would backtrack. They would go back to the square, find the kind old man, and ask him everything he knew about the family who lived behind the red door. The key to Blue's lost world, she realized, wasn't the house. It was the story of the family's absence. She lay down, pulling her meager resources around them both, the silent, sleeping weight of Blue a tangible reminder of the solemn vow she had made. The truth was out there, hidden somewhere in the city's vastness, and they would find it. The night was a relentless siege of cold and discomfort, even nestled deep within the park's bushes. Elara awoke before dawn, her body stiff and aching, every muscle protesting the cruel surface of the frozen earth. Blue was still asleep, curled into a tight ball, his face pale but peaceful. Her first thought was for him. She pressed her hand against his forehead. No fever. Another small victory in a life defined by tiny margins. She quickly packed their meager belongings, the single tattered blanket, the empty bread bag, and the precious, irreplaceable photograph. The failure at the red door had reinforced a harsh lesson. Action without information was a waste of their limited time and energy. Their mission for today was clear and singular: find the old man at the fountain. Moving through the waking city, they retraced their steps back toward the affluent square. The journey, usually undertaken with the stealth of a predator, was now a desperate race against the clock. Elara knew the kindness of a stranger could be as fleeting as the morning mist. If the old man wasn't at the fountain, their only solid lead would vanish. They reached the square just as the first office workers were beginning their commute, the air filled with the smell of expensive coffee and fresh pastries. Elara scanned the area near the fountain, her gaze skipping across the benches and ledges where people often sat. Relief washed over her like a warm wave. He was there. The kind old man, his worn hat pulled low, was already scattering crumbs to a flock of belligerent pigeons. Elara approached him slowly, cautiously, not wanting to spook him. Blue, still weary but awake, watched the pigeons with silent curiosity. "Sir?" "Excuse me," Elara whispered, standing respectfully a few feet away. The man turned, his eyes twinkling recognition behind his thick glasses. He smiled warmly. Well, hello there, young traveler. Did you find your way home last night? I was hoping you did. We found the house, sir, Elara said, her small voice earnest. She moved closer and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, a gesture of trust. The big one with the red door on Elmwood Street near the church. The old man nodded, tossing a final handful of crumbs. Yes, the Maxwell place. Beautiful home. So, the parents were there, were they? I imagine they were frantic with worry. Elara shook her head, her face a mask of confusion and frustration. No, sir. They weren't. The house was empty. Completely empty. It looked like nobody has lived there for a long time. Dust covers on the furniture and everything. The old man's brow furrowed, his smile fading into an expression of deep concern. He looked from Elara's tattered clothing to the quiet, fair-haired boy. He reached up and gently took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. Empty, you say? That is very strange. I only saw them a few weeks ago. The boy, you know. He was always with the lady. The mother. She used to bring him here to feed the ducks. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The family, they're new. Moved in about 6 or 7 months ago, I think. Very private, kept to themselves. The father, a tall man, was often traveling. But the mother and the boy were always together. I saw her just before you showed up yesterday. She was speaking with a man near the corner. A man? Who was he? Elara pressed, leaning forward, her pulse quickening. This was new information, a possible thread to pull. He looked like he meant business, the old man said, his voice dropping lower. Clean suit, dark coat. Not from the neighborhood. He was talking to her, showing her some papers. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, mind you, but they were arguing. Not shouting but intense. She looked terribly upset. Distressed. And then a few days after that they just vanished. Vanish. Elara echoed the word, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. You mean they moved out? No, the old man stated firmly. When people move out of a house like that, there are trucks, commotion, realtors. There was nothing. One day they were there, the next day they weren't. The lights were out and the place was quiet. And it's only been empty for maybe 10 days, 2 weeks at most. Not long enough to be covered in dust covers, not unless someone specifically put them on. And I haven't seen the cleaning crew around either. Elara's mind reeled. The house was empty for a short time, yet it was deliberately shut down. The mother was arguing with a man in a dark suit before the disappearance. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that felt less like a simple case of a lost child and more like something far more complicated and dangerous. She pulled out the photo, showing it to the man again. Look at the background, sir, she said, pointing to the barely visible stone lion. Does this look familiar? It's not at the Red Door house. The old man squinted at the image. Ah, the lion. I know that lion. It's quite unique. They're on the wall of the Riverside Manor estate. A gated community about a mile or so further west, near the river. Only the very wealthy live there. A different area entirely. He handed the photo back, his eyes now etched with real concern. They lived there before the Red Door house, he continued, piecing it together aloud. They moved. But why did I recognize them at the Red Door house if you say it's been empty? Because they were leaving that house, not living there anymore. I saw them there, yes, but not regularly, not like before. The mother often walked to the market from that area. Maybe she was just visiting that day or meeting someone. Elara gripped the photo. The Red Door house was a false trail, or perhaps, a place they had been actively moving from. The Riverside Manor estate was the original home, the one in the photograph. The stone lion was the key. They were victims of a deliberate red herring, perhaps unintentionally led astray by an outdated local memory. The old man reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Young one, listen to me. This is no ordinary missing child case. People like the Maxwells don't just vanish, especially after an argument with a man in a suit. If that boy is their son and he's out here with you and their house is empty, it means something is terribly wrong. You're a good girl for trying to help him, but you must be very careful now. Don't go to the police. Not yet. Find out what happened first. If they're looking for someone, they might be looking for him. The warning struck a deep chord. The urgency of their quest suddenly morphed into a chilling sense of peril. They weren't just searching for a family, they might be running from something, or someone. Thank you, sir, Elara managed, her voice barely a breath. "You've helped us more than you know. Be safe," he said, giving her a serious, meaningful look. "And don't show that picture to just anyone. It's a map to the boy." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tightly wrapped, thick paper napkin. "Take this. It's leftover from my breakfast. For the road." Inside was a warm, slightly squashed croissant. Elara felt a rush of gratitude, a lump forming in her throat. She tucked the croissant into her pocket, offering him the widest, most sincere smile she could muster. "We will be careful." With a nod, Elara turned and hurried away, Blue still in her arms. The goal was now Riverside Manor Estate, a wealthy enclave far from their current location, a place that would be heavily guarded and impossible for an orphan and a toddler to infiltrate. But the path was now clear: the Stone Lion, the gated community. They were no longer just looking for a lost child, they were embarking on a secret mission. The fast pace was back, but now it was driven by the knowledge of danger, adding a sharp, thrilling edge to their adventure. The city suddenly felt vast and hostile, but Elara felt a renewed purpose. She had Blue and she had the truth, a truth she intended to uncover no matter the risk. The journey to the Riverside Manor Estate was a grueling test of Elara's endurance. It lay on the far western edge of the city, separated from the poverty-stricken areas she knew by miles of upscale suburbs, commercial districts, and a wide, rushing river. Carrying Blue, who was growing heavier with every mile, she stuck to the fringes of the major roads, utilizing back alleys and public transportation only when absolutely necessary and always skirting the fare collectors. The croissant, carefully rationed, was their fuel, a taste of luxury that underscored the stark differences between their world and the one they were trying to infiltrate. The final approach to the estate was the most treacherous. The community was an island of extreme wealth, sealed off from the public by a tall, decorative iron fence, security cameras that swiveled with unsettling frequency, and a manned gatehouse. The old man's warning echoed in Elara's mind. This wasn't a lost and found scenario, it was a mission that required stealth and secrecy. They finally arrived near dusk. Elara found cover in a dense patch of riparian brush near the riverbank, a natural boundary that ran alongside the estate's long perimeter wall. From there she could observe the main entrance. The gate was a formidable obstacle, requiring an access code or verification from the armed guard inside the stone booth. Infiltrating through the front was impossible. She spent the next hour meticulously studying the perimeter, her 8-year-old brain working with the cold, calculating logic of a seasoned operative. The wall was too high to climb, the cameras too numerous. However, the river itself offered a sliver of hope. A small, dry culvert, designed to drain rainwater, passed directly under the estate's wall and emptied into the river. It was narrow, dark, and probably filled with stagnant water, but it was their only way in. Elara waited until true darkness had fallen, the moon a sliver of silver hidden behind thin clouds. She woke Blue, whose silent cooperation was a constant source of wonder and comfort. She explained the plan to him in a low, even whisper, treating him not like a toddler but a mission partner. "We're going through a tunnel, Blue. It's going to be wet and muddy, but we have to be quiet. Can you be quiet for Elara?" He nodded solemnly, his blue eyes huge in the gloom. Securing the precious photograph deep within her pocket, Elara picked up a discarded plastic bag and wrapped it tightly around Blue's feet to keep them somewhat dry. Taking a deep breath, she crawled into the cold, damp mouth of the culvert, pulling Blue in after her. The air inside was thick with the smell of wet earth and mildew. It was a tight squeeze, forcing her to propel herself forward with her elbows and knees, shielding Blue's head with one arm. The journey through the darkness felt eternal, the close confines pressing down on her growing anxiety. Finally, after what seemed like an hour, they emerged inside the estate. They were hidden by a stand of tall, ornamental pines, completely unseen by the perimeter cameras and the distant lights of the gatehouse. The air here smelled of expensive lawn treatments and damp pine needles. The contrast between this world and the city's grim alleys was staggering. The estate was a maze of sprawling, custom-built homes, each one a fortress of glass and stone, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. Elara stayed low, keeping to the shadows of the hedges and the tree line, moving stealthily toward the inner roads. They needed to find the house with the stone lion. Using the faint light from the moon and the distant streetlights, she scanned the properties. It took a heart-stopping 15 minutes of cautious crawling and sprinting between hedges, But then she saw it. Set atop a low decorative wall of a sprawling modern mansion, a house whose windows glowed with a cold internal light, was the familiar stylized stone lion. The sight was both an affirmation and a terrifying moment of truth. This was Blue's home. Elara crouched with Blue behind a thick rhododendron bush across the street from the house, initiating the silent watch. The house was unnervingly still. No lights were on in the upper-story windows, and no cars were parked in the long, curving driveway. The silence was not the silence of a house asleep, but the silence of a house vacated. The familiar, sickening feeling of hitting another dead end began to creep back. But as Elara watched, her eyes adjusting to the deep darkness, she noticed a crucial detail. The security floodlights, usually blindingly bright, were unlit. More importantly, the front door, a massive, dark wooden slab, was not fully closed. There was a sliver of darkness between the door and the frame, a crack that shouldn't be there in a high-security home. This was no ordinary vacancy. This was a house that had been left in a hurry, perhaps even deliberately. Her heart began to race again, fueled not by hope, but by a rising, cold suspicion. She waited a few minutes longer, scanning the street. There was no movement, no other observers. She had to risk it. The door was an invitation to the truth, and she couldn't ignore it. Leaving Blue nestled securely in the bushes, with strict instructions to stay put. Don't move even if you hear a noise. Elara will be right back. She darted across the street. Her bare feet made no sound on the pristine concrete. She moved like a shadow, her small size an asset. Reaching the massive front door, she pushed gently. It swung inward with a faint, almost inaudible groan, revealing an entryway plunged into darkness. The interior was massive, echoing, and silent. She slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut behind her, plunging the space into absolute darkness. The house was not just empty, it felt stripped of life. The air was cold, stale, and bore the faint, metallic scent of ozone, perhaps from a recently disabled alarm system. She felt her way across the marble floor of the foyer, her hands tracing the cold, smooth surfaces. She pulled out the photo and, using the tiny flash of a nearby street lamp filtering through a thin curtain, compared the background to the current room. The furniture matched the indistinct shapes in the photograph. This was definitely the Maxwell's home. The silence was deafening, the darkness absolute. Elara navigated by instinct, looking for any sign of a struggle, a note, a clue, anything that explained why they had left and why they hadn't taken Blue. She found it in the study, a small room off the main hall. A lamp was overturned on a large desk. She righted it carefully and found the switch. A soft, dim light filled the room, and what she saw confirmed her worst fears. The desk drawers were pulled out and emptied, papers scattered across the floor, but on the blotter, beneath a discarded envelope, was a crumpled note. Elara picked it up. It wasn't written on paper but on the back of a business card. The handwriting was neat, slanted, and clearly belonging to the mother from the photograph. The message was a frantic scribble. Safe. Go to Leo. He knows. Library, 10 p.m. Don't call. Leo. A new name. The library. The location, a time. A rendezvous. The fast-paced adventure had just taken a sharp, clear turn into the territory of a clandestine operation. The family wasn't gone, they were in trouble, and they had a secret meeting planned. Elara had stumbled into a desperate plot. She had less than 24 hours. The mystery of Blue's disappearance was dissolving into a more immediate, terrifying mission. She had to get Blue and get out. Now, the stone lion had led her to the truth, but the truth was a deadline. Elara slipped out of the Maxwell mansion as silently as she had entered, the crumpled business card with its frantic message clutched in her hand. The mansion's wealth now felt like a gilded cage, a place of danger, not sanctuary. She had to move fast. With Blue safely secured in the bushes, she made a brief, terrifying trip back to the study to smash the note's envelope, a blank, high-quality linen paper, before retrieving the note from her pocket and placing it underneath the knocked-over lamp, writing the desk surface. She could not leave her fingerprints or any trace of her entry. The only clue she could leave for any potential investigator was the mother's desperate message itself. She snatched Blue from the rhododendron bush, his eyes still heavy with sleep and confusion. She carried him swiftly back toward the culvert, her mind racing to process the new data. Safe. Go to Leo. He knows. Library, 10 p.m. Don't call. The date wasn't specified, but the urgency implied it was soon, perhaps tonight. It was 8:30 p.m. The library, likely the city's main public library, was massive in the center of downtown, and it would close at 9 p.m. The rendezvous was scheduled for an hour after closing. This confirmed her darkest suspicions. This was a secret, dangerous meeting. The crawl back through the culvert was faster, fueled by adrenaline. They emerged near the river, shaking off the mud and damp, and began the long trek downtown. Elara knew the city's public transport system, but after hours, it was unreliable and they couldn't afford to be seen. She stuck to the riverfront path for as long as possible, using the cover of the industrial zone's shadows. The weight of Blue was a secondary concern now. The ticking clock was her primary burden. By 9:45 p.m., they were near the sprawling, neoclassical building that housed the Central City Library. It was an architectural landmark, all white marble and high, arched windows. Its main doors were locked, the massive brass handles gleaming under the streetlights. Elara tucked Blue into a dark recess created by a row of decorative pillars near a side entrance, wrapping her blanket tightly around him. "Stay right here, Blue. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear." "I'll be close," she whispered. His large eyes looked up at her, full of silent trust. She then began to scope out the building, moving like a phantom around its wide perimeter. She wasn't looking for a door, but for an entry point a person familiar with the building might use. A janitor's entrance, a service hatch, or perhaps an old emergency exit. She found it at the back of the building near the loading dock, a rusty heavy-set fire escape leading up to the third floor. Crucially, the door beneath the fire escape was ajar, just a hair, enough to suggest a hasty or deliberate departure. Elara waited, her heart thumping against her ribs, counting the passing seconds. The streetlights buzzed. A few minutes past 10 p.m., a sleek black sedan, its windows tinted opaque, pulled up silently to the side entrance. The engine was cut immediately. The sight of the expensive car made Elara flatten herself completely into the shadows. Two figures emerged, a man and a woman. The woman was older, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, her expression grim and professional. The man was dressed in a dark, clean suit, tall and serious, perhaps the same man the old man at the fountain had described. The woman pulled a large, leather briefcase from the trunk. The man checked the surroundings with a practiced, sweeping gaze that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. They were professionals. This was not a family crisis. This was a transaction. The man tapped on the side door near the fire escape. The door beneath the fire escape, which had been barely ajar, was suddenly pulled open from the inside. A third person stepped out, a man with graying hair and a weary, scholarly look. This must be Leo. Elara crawled closer to the side entrance, staying low behind a recycling bin. She could hear the muffled exchange now. "Leo, you have it?" The woman's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the night air. "It's all here, everything I could retrieve. The hard drive, the encrypted files, and the original patents," Leo replied, his voice tight with fear. "This is everything James has been working on. It's worth billions. Are you certain he didn't tell you where he went?" "James went dark for a reason, Leo," the man in the dark suit interjected, his voice flat and authoritative. "He was compromised. His contact sent us the signal. He knew we'd meet at the library to transfer the assets. The boy, however, is the complication. He told us they left the boy with a temporary relative before going into hiding. We can't find the relative. James should know the boy is the only leverage they have on him." "Leverage? The boy is safe with his Aunt Clara. James arranged it weeks ago," Leo protested, his voice laced with confusion. "Clara's house is empty, Leo. Just like the Maxwell house," the woman snapped, seizing the briefcase from him. "He clearly lied to you. It's a clean break. James went dark and he took the boy with him, but someone got to him first. Now we're out of time. We have the data, we'll track James later. For now, we need to focus on securing the information. Thank you for your service, Leo. Your account will be taken care of." Leo's eyes widened in dawning horror. "Wait, James is missing and the boy is missing? You're not helping him. You're his partners. Who are you?" Before Leo could finish, the man in the dark suit moved with terrifying speed. A single, swift motion, and Leo crumpled to the ground, a soft thud swallowed by the surrounding stone. The man didn't use a gun. He merely rendered Leo unconscious with a precise, clinical strike. Elara's breath hitched in her throat. She bit down hard on her lip to suppress a gasp. The man was not a simple security guard or business associate. He was an operative, ruthless and efficient. This was not about a child's safety. It was about billions in stolen intellectual property and a missing father who had run. Blue wasn't lost, he was missing, part of a family on the run, now separated. And the people in the black car were not the good guys. The woman spoke, her voice devoid of emotion. He's a liability. Call a service, have him taken care of. He only knows James and his wife are safe, and that they're trying to hide the data. Let him wake up thinking we're their salvation. She climbed back into the black sedan, the briefcase heavy on her lap. The dark-suited man followed, and the car sped away, disappearing into the city night. Elara waited, frozen by the shock and the sudden fear that felt like ice water in her veins. Once the car was truly gone, she crept out of the shadows. Leo lay unconscious but breathing near the door. The word "safe" from the note was now horrifyingly ironic. James and his wife had engineered a secret meeting with an unsuspecting ally to transfer the data, but their partners had intercepted the communication. James had hidden his son with a supposed relative, but the partners couldn't find her, or her empty house. The mention of the empty Maxwell house and the empty Aunt Clara house confirmed James's plan, to create a trail of false leads, a network of empty houses, to throw off his pursuers. Blue, in a terrifying twist, was either an accidental survivor of the family's frantic escape or worse, a piece of leverage James had risked leaving behind. Elara knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't help Leo and she couldn't risk being found near him. She was an 8-year-old girl who had just witnessed a violent corporate espionage takedown. She had the one crucial piece of information the pursuers didn't: Blue's location. She sprinted back to the pillars, scooped up the heavy, sleeping boy and fled the library grounds. They were in the open now, the city silent and hostile. She had to find James and his wife before the people in the black car found them. But the note offered no further directions, only a desperate plan that had been brutally foiled. Elara now knew the search was over. The adventure was no longer a search for a family, but a race to deliver a boy and a warning to parents who were being hunted. The clock was still ticking, and the city was suddenly far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The shock of what she had witnessed at the library sent Elara and Blue into a desperate scramble for safety. They were no longer lost children. They were witnesses and, worse, potential leverage in a high-stakes, ruthless corporate chase. The black sedan and the cold efficiency of its occupants were etched into Elara's memory. She knew they couldn't stay in the downtown area. The pursuers would soon realize Leo's meeting was a dead end and would circle back to the last known trail, the empty Maxwell house and the lost boy. Elara headed back toward the familiarity of the industrial zone, a place of shadows, noise and indifference where a small girl and a toddler could vanish for a few hours. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but the fear of the man in the dark suit was a powerful, bitter stimulant. They found temporary refuge beneath the corroded chassis of a decommissioned transport truck, its underside offering a small, dry space hidden from the streetlights. Now that the initial terror had subsided, Elara forced herself to think. The family was not missing, they were on the run. James Maxwell had manufactured a sequence of decoys: the empty Red Door house, the empty Aunt Clara's house, and the intercepted meeting with Leo. Every clue had been designed to mislead, but the boy, Blue, was the single catastrophic flaw in his plan. The partners now knew the boy was a critical weakness, and they would be searching for him with renewed vigor. The only way to help Blue's parents was to warn them, to get Blue to them before the pursuers found him first. But where was James Maxwell? The note hadn't said. Elara pulled out the business card with the scribbled message, turning it over and over. Say, go to Leo. He knows. Library, 10 p.m. Don't call. The business card itself was the key. It wasn't the library's card, but an unmarked, professional-looking card printed on heavy stock. She tilted it in the faint moonlight filtering through a crack in the truck. In the very bottom corner, in tiny, almost microscopic font, was a small, embossed symbol, a stylized double helix intertwined with an atom. Below it, a barely legible name and address: Helix Research Labs, Dock 4, Portside. A scientific research lab. James was a chemist or physicist, dealing with patents worth billions, as Leo had said. The note hadn't been an instruction to Leo, It had been an instruction from James's wife, a frantic call for help, hoping that Leo, her husband's research partner, would be the one to find the note and know what to do. The family's safe haven must be connected to James's work, a place they knew, perhaps a secret lab or a secure location used by the company. Elara knew the portside area. It was miles away, a desolate stretch of docks and warehouses near the mouth of the river. It was too far to walk with a tired toddler, and the docks were patrolled by their own security and the watchful eyes of the longshoremen. They needed transport and they needed it quickly. She looked at Blue, who was dozing fitfully, a small frown marring his face. He was exhausted. She was exhausted. But the idea of those people finding them, of the man in the dark suit taking Blue, sent a fresh wave of protective adrenaline through her. The answer came from her memories of the streets. She remembered seeing the delivery trucks for the Helix Research Labs, clean, white vans with the same double Helix logo, often parked near a rundown diner she frequented for scraps. With a firm decision, Elara carefully nudged Blue awake. "Wake up, little one. We have to go on a ride. A long, fast ride." She carried him out from under the truck and began walking toward the diner. It took almost 40 minutes, a painful trudge through cold streets, but they reached the familiar corner. Hidden behind the diner, just as she hoped, was a small parking area used by the day shift. And there, parked near the back, was a white van bearing the logo of the Helix Research Labs. It was a risk of unimaginable proportions. Breaking into a vehicle, even an unlocked one, could land her in serious trouble, a fate worse than sleeping on the streets. But this wasn't about her anymore. This was the only way to get Blue to Dock 4, portside, before morning. Elara's resourceful nature kicked in. She examined the van. The driver's side was locked, but the back loading doors, which were secured with a padlock, had been hastily latched with a simple, cheap clasp before the lock was applied. Using a small, stiff piece of wire she always carried, a tool of her trade, gleaned from a bicycle tire, she began to work on the cheap latch. Her fingers, nimble and accustomed to fine work, moved quickly. A faint click and the outer clasp gave way. Carefully, quietly, she slid the large door open just enough to slip inside. The van's interior was filled with crates and boxes labeled "Biological Samples Fragile," emitting a faint, sterile odor. Elara settled Blue into a corner, cushioning him with her blanket and a pile of soft packing foam. She wrapped him up tightly and kissed the top of his golden head. "We're going to find them, Blue. We're going to make it." She sat back in the dark, cold van, the metal rattling faintly with the wind. The knowledge of their destination, Dock 4, portside, gave her a sense of direction, a final trajectory. But the true adventure lay ahead, finding a way into a secure dockyard, locating her hidden parents, and warning them of the danger that was tracking their every move. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to conserve energy, listening to the vast, indifferent sounds of the sleeping city. The night was their ally, the van their chariot, and the faint, cold symbol on a business card, their final map. The pace had been relentless, but the hardest, most dangerous part, the confrontation, was still to come. The Helix Research Labs van shuddered to a halt, the squeal of its brakes tearing through the pre-dawn stillness of the portside dockyard. The driver, a weary man starting his shift, climbed out, muttering about the early hour and fumbling with his keys. Elara and Blue, nestled among the crates in the back, held their breath, motionless. The driver unlocked the back doors, pulled out a small equipment box, and slammed the doors shut, thankfully not bothering to relatch them with the cheap clasp. Elara waited until the sound of his footsteps faded into the cavernous metallic echo of the docks before she slid the door open just enough to peer out. They were at Dock 4. The massive loading area was a chaotic landscape of stacked shipping containers, coiled ropes, and industrial machinery, all bathed in the harsh, sodium-yellow glow of the security lights. The air smelled strongly of brine, diesel, and metal. The large building before them, a low-slung warehouse, was clearly marked with the Helix Research Labs logo and had a single heavily reinforced security door. Elara slipped out of the van, pulling Blue after her. The cold concrete bit at her feet. She looked around, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of the man in the dark suit or the black sedan. The immediate area seemed clear, patrolled only by the slow, predictable sweep of the yellow lights. She pulled out the business card again, the one with the crucial address, and pointed Blue toward the looming warehouse. "This is it, Blue. We're going in." The main door was impossible. Elara led them along the building's perimeter, weaving between the mountains of containers. She was looking for a secondary entry, perhaps a service hatch or a forgotten access point. Her heart pounded a frantic tattoo against her ribs. They were running out of time. Dawn was breaking and soon the docks would come alive with workers and security. She found it on the far side of the warehouse, shielded from the main security camera. A small and used vent for an HVAC unit, set low to the ground and covered by a rusty grate. The bolts holding the grate in place were old, corroded by the salty air. Elara knew she couldn't break them, but she also knew corrosion was their friend. Using a sharp rock she found nearby, she hammered repeatedly at the weakest point of the grate's frame. The noise was muffled by the wind and the size of the dockyard, but every impact felt deafening to her. Finally, with a screech of tortured metal, the grate buckled enough for her to wedge it outward. The opening was just large enough for her small frame. She had to move Blue, whose quiet fear was now evident in his trembling, through the hole first. She pushed him gently, then wriggled through the dusty, tight space after him, emerging into a narrow, dark utility corridor inside the massive warehouse. The air inside was warm and sterile, buzzing with the sound of machinery. They were in. Elara held Blue's hand tightly and moved toward the only source of light, a set of double doors marked Restricted Access, Lab Level 3. She pushed open the doors to reveal a stunningly modern research facility. Rows of blinking computers and high-tech equipment lined the room, but the center was dominated by a large, reinforced glass partition, behind which was a smaller, inner room. And inside that inner room she saw them. The woman from the photograph, Blue's mother, was sitting at a console, her face drawn with exhaustion. The man, Blue's father, James Maxwell, was standing by a large screen displaying complex scientific schematics. They were working frantically, surrounded by luggage and the remnants of a rushed stay. They were alive, and they were trying to secure their research before making their final escape. "Mommy?" Blue's small, exhausted cry broke the silence of the lab. He pulled his hand free from Elara's grip and ran towards the glass partition. The mother looked up, her head snapping around. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and shock, met her son's. "Max! Max!" she cried, scrambling to her feet, running to the partition, her hands pressing against the glass. James Maxwell spun around, his expression instantly changing from professional focus to pure, unadulterated terror. He didn't focus on the boy but on Elara, on the knowledge that someone had followed the trail of decoys all the way here. "Who are you? How did you find us?" James demanded, rushing to the outer lab door, his eyes darting frantically. Before Elara could answer, the heavy, reinforced door to the corridor burst inward with a sickening sound of splintered metal. Standing in the doorway were three figures: the woman with the briefcase, the man in the dark suit, and a third, equally grim-faced operative. They had been tracking James's movements all along, perhaps through the van's GPS or a hidden tracker, and they knew this was his last sanctuary. "Hello, James," the woman with the briefcase purred, her voice cold. "We knew you couldn't resist finishing the job. And look what we found, your leverage right here." She nodded toward Blue, who was now clinging to his mother's side behind the glass. The man in the dark suit advanced, his eyes focused on Elara. "And the girl. A witness. Good work, Agent. Bring them both." Elara didn't hesitate. She knew she had mere seconds. "They know about Leo. They took the data," she shouted, her voice shrill with adrenaline. She didn't try to run. She threw herself at a metal stand holding a rack of glass tubes, sending them crashing to the floor with a deafening shatter. The diversion worked. James, hearing the name Leo and the confirmation that his data was compromised, acted immediately. He slammed his hand onto a small red button near the inner lab's console. "Contamination Protocol Alpha," he yelled. The warehouse was instantly plunged into darkness as the main power was cut. Emergency red lights flickered on, bathing the scene in a demonic glow. A loud siren began to wail and heavy metal blast doors began to slide down, sealing the entire lab. "The building is locked down. You'll never get the schematics now," James shouted through the partition to the intruders. The man in the dark suit cursed, rushing at the console. Elara had been near, searching for the power override. The woman with the briefcase, realizing the situation had devolved into a scramble, focused on Elara. "Grab the girl," she screamed. Elara was small, quick, and intimately familiar with the art of evasion. She darted beneath a workbench, avoiding the agent's grasping hand. She knew she couldn't fight, but she could stall. She knocked over a stack of empty chemical drums, sending them rolling into the agent's path. James, meanwhile, was working frantically. He pulled a small emergency satellite phone from his pocket. "It's encrypted, but I'm sending the schematics to the international registry now. You're too late." A burst of static ripped through the facility as the dark-suited man smashed the phone with the butt of his pistol. But the message had been set. The priceless research was no longer exclusively in the hands of the corporate predators. In the ensuing chaos, the sirens, the red lights, the frantic struggle, Elara saw her chance. Max's mother, her eyes shining with tears and gratitude, pointed frantically to a narrow maintenance hatch tucked low into the wall of the inner lab. James nodded. "The river access. Go." The mother snatched Max up, her eyes meeting Elara's through the glass. "Come with us. Now." But the man in the dark suit was finally closing in, cornering Elara near the outer wall. She was trapped. "It's over, kid. You're coming with me," he snarled, reaching for her arm. Elara, fueled by pure defiance, pulled the crumpled, blood-stained photograph from her pocket and threw it directly into his face. He stumbled back, momentarily blinded by the flying paper. It was all the time she needed. She scrambled toward the inner lab, but the blast door had sealed completely just before the Maxwells reached the hatch. The heavy steel partition was now their only barrier, a permanent wall between her and them. Elara stood before the glass, her hands pressed against the cold, hard surface, mirroring the spot where Max's mother had stood minutes before. The outer lab was silent now, save for the hum of the power-down sequence and the panting of the corporate agents. The woman in the suit walked over to the glass, her face contorted with cold fury. "Where are they?" Elara didn't flinch. She just pointed one small dirty finger at the small maintenance hatch, now fully closed. The woman spun around and ordered the agents to open the blast door. But it was locked down, requiring a code only James knew. Elara, utterly spent, slid down the glass. She looked down at the floor where the faded photograph lay face up. Max's parents, smiling at the camera, their son safely out of reach. The reckoning had come and gone. Elara had failed to find a home for herself, but she had saved a family. Her adventure, a desperate sprint across a cold city, had ended right where it began. Alone in the darkness, but with the quiet knowledge that she had chosen to be the hero, not the victim. The corporate agents would be stuck here until morning, and the Maxwells had bought themselves a head start. Elara was now a loose end, a dangerous witness, but one they would never find. She was once again a ghost, ready to disappear into the vast, uncaring city that was her only home. She would take the silence of her survival and the memory of Max's voice and begin her solitary journey anew. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.